Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
right, 23 minutes before 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. Our next story we want to share with you is not a story. It's a memoir. And it's the memoir of a woman who has some great accomplishments. If you look at her resume or what do you say, her bio, clearly an accomplished lady. And it's amazing the twists and turns that our lives take. And in Judge Marylin E. Atkins' case, she has pretty much done and seen it all. She served 12 years as chief judge of Detroit, Michigan. By the way, this part is impressive. Of course, the whole thing is impressive. The 36th District Court. Sorry, I slipped in a big old parentheses there. She also plays piano and does carpentry. I always like when I see that kind of stuff on the bio, right?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
It is interesting.
Cool.
I'm going to let her tell much of this story, but trust me, if you know somebody who's like in a biracial relationship right now, or maybe has been, we see it all the time. It's nothing new, and it's kind of Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream, right? To see people not worrying about the color of their skin, but rather the character of their soul, or whatever the actual words are. Good morning. How you doing? Let's see Judge Marylin E. Atkins. I spoke to her briefly off there. Good morning, Judge Atkins. Good morning.
Good morning.
Where are you? Where are you calling from?
I'm in Detroit, Michigan.
And if you've lived there all your life, right?
I grew up in Saginaw, Larry. My adoptive parents, I was born in Detroit, and they were from Saginaw, so they took me back to Saginaw. Okay. That's where I was raised.
Did you ever, and your biological mom, did you ever get to know her?
I did not. Oh. No, I did not.
Okay. But she named you Rosemary?
Yes.
Okay, and then you were adopted.
My name was Rosemary Lupo. She was Italian, and that was my name at birth.
So you are the product of a biracial relationship, correct?
Yes. Okay,
and so take us from there. You were born, and they needed your biological parents needed to adopt you. Your father was actually married to another lady, right?
Yes, that's what I'm told, right? And he was the secret boyfriend of my biological mother, and he was black. And because I was biracial, the Italian said I could not join the family, so I was placed in foster care.
Oh, no. Okay, that's a big... wow. The world has changed, I hope, for the better.
Much, 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 yes.
Yeah. So the reason I keep asking it as if it's a question is because when Rob and I read these books, sometimes I skim mine. She's really thorough, so she'll ask you better questions than me, but I zoom through some of these. So take it from there. So you were born, and then how old were you when you were adopted?
I was 6 months old.
Okay.
When I was adopted. So the only parents I knew were my adoptive parents.
Okay. What was life like for you at that age? Well, not that age necessarily, but as a young child?
Well, my adoptive mother was physically and emotionally abusive toward me. Oh, no. And my adoptive father was a very sweet guy, but, he was totally under her control. And so at the age of 12, I'm saying to myself, I have to go along to get along with this woman, because one of these days I will be able to be away from her. And actually that happened when I got married at 20, but her emotional and verbal abuse continued until she was up in age and began to develop dementia. And then she became a very nice person. What I've realized is a lot of people that have read my book see how that relationship ended up. It was very, very tumultuous. She was brutal. But I do have to give her credit for what I became, because while she was saying to me all my life, you will never amount to anything, if I did not make the honor roll, if I did not play the piano well, if I did not do what I was supposed to do and be a perfect child and a perfect teenager, I was beaten. So she taught me through physical punishment to succeed, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. It's a hard thing to. I don't think it's necessary to be that way toward a child to get the success that you experience, but it's not unusual to hear it. It is kind of somewhat unusual, I guess I should say. So, did you know at that young age that you were adopted?
I found out at the age of 10. My mother, my adoptive mother, who could not have children, never liked to use the word, and she wouldn't use the word adopted. And I had a brother, not a biological brother, but they adopted a boy who was 4 years older than me, and they adopted him from an orphanage here in Detroit. He had actually been taken away from his parents, and when my parents visited the orphanage, they see this little boy, and they chose him to adopt. And he left home at 16. But let me get back. My mother never said, you're adopted, to either one of us. And I found that out when my parents and I visited some of their friends, and their daughter, who was also 10, were skipping rope outside. She said, what's your real name? And I said, my real name is Marylin. No, that's not your real name. What's your mother's real name?
What?
I said, my mother is in your house. My mother is in your house. Well, do you know who your real mother? I said, my mother's in your house. And she said, no, that's your adopted mother. And she's 10.
How'd she know?
Because grown-ups talk stuff around children. And she had heard her parents talking about the boy and the girl that my parents adopted. And so I said, what's adopted? She said, adopted means it's babies that nobody wants, and somebody comes in and adopts them.
Oh, my gosh.
So, yeah, and that's how I found out at the age of 10. So when we got home, the first thing I did was ask my brother, who was 14, and he said, yes, we're adopted. They are not our biological parents.
Oh, he knew.
Yeah, he knew. But he knew because he was adopted at age 5.
Yeah.
He already had a history with a family.
Was he told to not tell you?
I don't know, but he never did.
Mm-hmm.
He never did until that night. He said, yeah, Mom and Dad are not our real parents. So I storm into the kitchen and I say, am I adopted? And my mother hit the ceiling. Who told you that? And my father looked at her and said, it's time. So she took me in the bedroom and she told me the whole story.
Wow.
And I didn't feel any different, Larry.
Was she kind to you when she told you the story?
She was, and she kept using the word special.
Oh.
You know, you're special. You're special. God wanted us to have you, and your mother only bore you so we could have you.
That sounds contrary to what how you described her earlier, but maybe that's because people are complicated. There is no one way to describe anybody.
She was very complicated, and she was a closeted hoarder when I was growing up. I mean, I saw signs. I didn't know what it was, but after my father died and I moved out, she became a full-blown hoarder. And when I moved her out of her house, and we have a cottage up north in Michigan, I mean, it looked like a landfill, and I had to deal with all of that. And seeing that, by that time I was an adult, and I realized, wow, she's got problems. Nobody ever explained her to me.
I want to talk to you about your adult life, but before we do that, I want to ask you about your career. As everything you told us so far, did that help you when you are sitting on the bench as a judge? Because when it comes time to judge other human beings, obviously you have to draw somewhat from what you know, and it sounds like you know, because of your own personal experience, the twists and turns that we all go through that make us who we are.
Yes, my compassion came from my upbringing. My compassion for people. Of course, as a judge, you got to follow the law. You got to apply the law.
Yeah.
And there are lots and lots of legal guidelines that judges have to follow, but you can weave in there compassion towards the defendant. Also depending upon what the crime, what crime they're charged. Especially young people who went through. They went through a lot more than I did. And they came out the other end,
wow.
Robbing and stealing and so forth.
What type of cases did you hear?
Criminal and civil.
Oh, okay.
Landlord-tenant. We did. We heard the criminal. What we did was determine whether or not somebody charged with a felony. If there was enough reasonable cause for them to go to trial on it, and we had the power to dismiss it if we didn't find that, that the prosecutor had provided enough probable cause. But listen, 99 plus 99%, they did have it. They did have what they needed the person to go on to trial.
That's a good thing. I mean, maybe we don't have the perfect system, but that whole checks and balances thing that we have built into our judicial system, that's an example of it right there. The fact that we have that, so that's a good thing.
It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
Now you had your husband has a history also.
Yes.
So talk to us about him. You said you were married at 20?
I married him at 20. I had known him since the age of 15 or 16. He was a Roman Catholic priest.
Wow.
And I was the organist. I was the organist at the parish. I played at two parishes. I was the organist at the parish where he was the assistant pastor. So I had known him for a few years before we sat down and had this conversation. At the age of 19, I wanted a face-to-face confession. I was always afraid of the confessional in back of the Catholic Church, the little dark box, and you sit there, and the priest is on the other side of that little piece of black cloth.
Right.
So I never liked that, and so I wanted to go. I can't tell you what I confessed at 19. I don't remember at this point.
It's not our business anyway. Yeah.
Well, yeah. But anyway, his name was Father Thomas Atkins, and I asked him if I could have a face-to-face confession with him, and he said sure. So I went to the rectory, which was next door to the church. I sat across from his big mahogany desk. I confessed my sins. He gave me absolution. I'm 19 and he's 44. And I'm black and he's white. And he's a priest and I'm a Catholic girl. And after he gave me absolution, he said, "Now, can I talk to you about something that's been on my mind?" And I looked at him like, "Sure, Father. Yep, sure, Father. What problem?" You get to live in the rectory. People love you. What problems could you possibly have? And that's the thing. Catholics do not understand the private lives of priests and nuns and the things that they have to go through within themselves to keep their vows and so forth.
Oh my gosh! So I could never do that. No.
He said to me, "I have been considering leaving the priesthood for the last 2 years." And I looked at him and I said, "There's no such thing." And he pulls out all these articles. This is 1965. He pulls out all these articles and of the priest exodus in the 60s all over the country. Lots and lots and lots of priests were leaving for a lot of different reasons. And I said, "I don't think that's a good idea. What is it you want to do?" And he said, "I've always wanted my own family. I want a wife and children."
Well, good for him.
And I have been a priest for 15 years. Yeah. And I made up my mind at that point that I was going to convince him not to leave. And I said, can we talk about this? And I left the rectory thinking, I'm on a mission. He can't leave. He's a good priest. He's a good man. And I'm going to convince him to stay. Well, I didn't. And
so did he continue with a ministry of some sort, even though it may not? Obviously, the rules are you have to be celibate to be a priest.
Right.
But that's not every religion. I mean, you could have been a different religion or something else in the Catholic religion, maybe. I don't know. But did he continue with the ministry?
No. What happened was on the 50th anniversary of his of his ordination, he gave his last sermon. He gave a sermon, and then at the end, he told the congregation he was leaving. And I'm upstairs in the choir loft watching him saying, don't do it, don't do it. And he did it. And there was just this sigh and gasp all through the church when he said, this is my last Mass, I'm leaving the priesthood. And he didn't say why. And then he moved out of the rectory into the YMCA. And he called me, and he said, may I take you to dinner? And I said, sure. And I went to dinner. We began to talk. And the next thing I know, he proposed.
Wow.
And I said, whoa, wait, hold it. You are white. You're an ex-priest. You work in a flower shop. I'm 19. I'm black. I work in a bank. I want you to become laicized, which means that, they unpriest him, actually. That's what it means. Well, the bishop wouldn't do that for him because the bishop has to intercede to Rome to get that done, and he refused to do that. So we go along, and long story short, I fall in love with him. And I said, yes, I will marry you. And just to give you just a little taste, he said, I've never been with a woman. And so, anyway, my daughter Elizabeth was conceived sometime in October of 1960.
Wow. It sounds like you had a real gift at that moment. I mean, his interest in you, his attraction to you was good for him and good for you. And considering what you went through as a young person, it's like, oh my gosh, about time something good happens for you. And I know other good things happen.
On the head.
Yeah. So, wow, I love that story. That's a real beautiful love story right there.
Larry, you hit the nail on the head because I found peace in him. And I was willing to go through hell and high water with the church, with my family, with his family, with the community. In the 60s, it was not popular to be in an interracial marriage. What about the children and all of it? But because that man what brought me peace, I said, this is it. This is what I want. And the marriage that people said would not last 24 hours lasted 24 years, and then he died of kidney failure in 1990 at the age of 68.
Oh
my God.
Well, now he must have been very supportive of you when you had to go to school and become an attorney and become a judge.
He was Mr. Mom when I was in. First, I had to go back and finish my undergraduate. But in 1971, I looked at him and I looked at my children and I started counting the years and I said, oh my goodness, when it's time for them to go to college, it's going to be time for him to retire. And I looked at him, I said, I got to get back to school. And I went back, finished my undergraduate, because somebody had to put our daughters through college. And I knew that in his 60s, he was not going to be able to do that. He worked for the state of Michigan, but, it wasn't a real high-paying job, not to take care of college.
Yeah.
So I've had to get in something where I was pretty sure that my money-making was going to increase. And I decided that as a lawyer, that would be where it was. And I was absolutely right. I put both of our daughters through University of Michigan at the same time. They're only a year apart.
They're beautiful too.
Yeah.
On the back of the book, there's a photo of your family, I guess, taken in the 60s, I think. I don't know if that's true or not.
That's in the 80s.
Oh,
That's
the
in the 80s.
Okay, and
Yeah.
what a beautiful family. And I was looking at some of the pictures. You guys went to Epcot, and that's always fun, right? That's, yeah.
The book is it's so courageous of you to write this book and put everything in perspective, because even today there are some people that aren't acceptable of people being together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
We felt all of that. And people would stare, but they would stare for two reasons. Number one, here's a white man with white hair, with two little children that look white,
Right.
and then there's this me. I'm a fair-skinned black woman, but you could always tell that I'm much younger than him. And then, who are these people? So we went through all of that.
And it's very wonderful that you instilled the idea of college into your children. How are their talents, though? Did they go into music or art or anything like that?
Well, they took piano lessons for a while, and then they just finally said, we don't like it. And I said, that's okay. My mother made me continue taking piano lessons, and she was a piano teacher, as a matter of fact, and also organ lessons. But my daughters always enjoyed writing, and my husband wrote in a journal every single day, morning and night, and they saw that from the time they were babies. He started writing it in 1964, and they watched him early in the morning. Watched him early in the morning write in his journal, and in the evening, and they developed this love of writing. And so they both majored in English and writing at U of M.
Oh, wow.
And then Elizabeth received a master's in journalism from Columbia, and Catherine received a master's in English and writing from University of San Francisco. And they have formed their own company, Two Sisters Writing and Publishing, and they published my book.
I was going to say, that's
there
your
you
book.
go.
Oh, wow.
That gives me chills.
Well, you said you fell in love with him. We fell in love with you in the 20 minutes you've been with us. Let's see, I have a copy of The Triumph of Rosemary. If I have a listener who would like it, call me. I'll pick one caller at random, and it'll be yours. The rest of us have to buy it. I found it on Amazon. And let's see, do you have a different website you want to recommend to us?
TwoSistersWriting.com. That's my daughter's companies.
Okay.
And you can get anything. And they have been very successful in writing books, ghostwriting, teaching people how to write, and writing their own books.
Well, good for them and good for you. It sounds like there was a guardian angel with you along the way, even maybe you didn't know it at first, but you went through some tough times, and I'm glad everything worked out in a beautiful way. Thank you so much for being on the show with us, Marylin.
Thank you for having me. I've truly enjoyed it.
You're welcome. Well, we'll take a little break. We'll be right back.
On this episode,
and world leaders paying tribute to George H.W. Bush, German Chancellor Angela Merkel praising the late president's support for her country's unification.
One of the fathers of the German unification, and we will never forget that.
Former Secretary of State James Baker recalled